They told me family was everything, but mine was willing to strip me of the only place I called home. My country house, promised to me by my father, suddenly became a bargaining chip for my pregnant sister. She needs it more than you, my mother snapped, as if my life had no weight. For years, I endured their favoritism in silence. This time, I acted first. I sold the house in secret, every signature burning like fire on my hand. 2 weeks later, my father stormed inside. He never expected who was waiting for him. Neither did I. The country house had always been more than wood and stone to me. It was stitched with the laughter of my childhood summers, the creaking porch swing that carried my daydreams, and the smell of my father's pipe smoke drifting across the garden in the evenings. He had once placed his hand on my shoulder when I was 12 and said, "One day, Clara, this place will be yours. Promise me you'll keep it alive." I carried those words like scripture, a secret vow between us. At 37, I lived elsewhere, but every weekend I returned. I tended the rose bushes, patched the cracked shutters, and felt a sense of grounding every time I turned the key in the heavy oak door. To outsiders, our family seemed unshakably close. Sunday dinners, laughter spilling out onto the porch, photographs lined neatly in frames across the mantel. Anyone who visited would call it idyllic. And yet, beneath the surface, there was always a current I could not ignore. My older sister, Lila, had always been the favoured child. When she cried, the world rushed to comfort her. When she failed, excuses poured in like warm syrup. And when I succeeded, silence met me. Now, with her pregnancy, that favoritism had transformed into something sharper, more demanding. At dinner one evening, as the cicadas hummed outside and the smell of roast chicken filled the air, my mother cleared her throat with a weight I recognised all too well. "Clara," she said, her fork poised in mid-air, "it's time we talked about the house." I froze, the fork in my own hand, hovering, waiting. "What about it?" I asked. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in a look that had always made me feel 10 years old again. "Lila needs it. She's about to have a child, and she can't raise a baby in that cramped apartment. It makes sense to sell this place and buy her a proper home." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. The words felt like a blunt instrument to the chest. "Sell it?" I whispered. "You want to sell my house?" My mother scoffed. "It's not your house. It's the family's. You've had your time with it, but Lila has a baby coming. She needs it more than you." I glanced at my father, desperate for him to intervene, but he only pushed peas around his plate, his jaw tight, eyes refusing to meet mine. His silence was louder than any betrayal. Anger surged hot in my chest. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling. "Dad promised this house would be mine. You can't just erase that because Lila's having a baby." Mother's lips curled into that familiar, condescending smile. "Don't be selfish, Clara. A child needs a home. If you refuse, you're denying your own niece or nephew a safe place to grow up. Do you really want to carry that on your conscience?" Gaslighting. I knew the tactic. Still, the words burrowed under my skin. I stared at the tablecloth, the neat pattern blurring, and for a flicker of a second I questioned myself. Was I truly selfish for wanting to keep what had been promised to me? But then I looked up, catching a strange flicker in my father's eyes. Not guilt. Something else. Fear. As if he was hiding more than just agreement with my mother's plan. I pushed back my chair, the legs screeching against the floor. This is not just about Lila. Something else is going on here, and I won't be manipulated into giving up what's mine. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My sister placed her hand over her belly with dramatic fragility, as though I had personally threatened her unborn child. My mother reached out and patted Lila's arm with exaggerated tenderness. The message was clear. Clara is the villain. Clara doesn't care about family. I couldn't eat another bite. I excused myself, walking out into the night air, my chest heaving with anger and disbelief. Later, as I slipped back inside to gather my purse, I heard it, my mother's whisper, sharp as broken glass, drifting through the kitchen doorway. Don't worry, Lila, she'll have to give in eventually. One way or another, she'll have to. My sister's laugh followed, smug and certain. She always does. The words sliced me open. In that instant, I understood. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as an obstacle. The following week, I returned to the country house alone, needing its quiet to soothe me. But as I walked up the gravel path, I noticed something strange. A car I didn't recognize parked out front. My heart pounded as I quickened my steps, each crunch of gravel like a drumbeat. Inside, voices echoed from the parlour. A man's voice, low and unfamiliar, speaking to my mother. I froze in the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. She was showing the house to someone I had never met, and no one had told me. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even poured my first cup of coffee. It was a notification from social media. Against my better judgment, I opened it and froze. Lila had posted a carefully staged photo of herself, hands clasped lovingly over her belly, our parents on either side of her, smiling like saints. The caption read, "Family means sacrifice." Some people understand that, others don't. The comments poured in. "You're so brave, Lila. Your sister should support you, not fight you. Every baby deserves a home." I scrolled, my stomach twisting. Not one person asked about me. Not one person questioned her story. She had painted me as the selfish sibling, the one too cold-hearted to help her pregnant sister. When I called her, my voice shaking with rage, she answered sweetly, "Clara, I didn't mean you. People can interpret things however they want." "You know exactly what you did," I hissed. Her voice hardened. "Maybe if you acted like part of this family, I wouldn't have to remind everyone who the real problem is." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. But her words stayed, a thorn twisting deeper. Days passed and the isolation spread like a virus. Family friends who used to greet me warmly at the market now looked at me with thin-lipped disapproval. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming. Even my father, once my quiet confidant, seemed to avoid me, his gaze dropping whenever we crossed paths. It was as if I had been erased from my own family. One night I drove back to the country house, desperate for solace. I sat on the porch swing, listening to the creak of its chains and the chirp of crickets in the fields. Memories washed over me, those Sunday dinners where I believed foolishly that we were a family bound by love, not convenience. I remembered Lila and I laughing over burnt pies in the kitchen, my father lifting me onto his shoulders to reach the apple tree, my mother humming while she folded laundry. Were those moments real, or had I imagined the warmth because I wanted so badly to belong? I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. Was I ever loved, or was I always just tolerated? I whispered into the night. The phone buzzed in my lap. A message glowed on the screen. "Clara, it's Daniel." I have something to tell you about the house. Something you don't know." My chest tightened. Daniel. He had been my childhood friend, the boy from next door, before his family moved away. I hadn't heard from him in years. The next day I met him at a small cafe in town. He looked older, more weathered, but his eyes still carried that same sincerity I remembered. "Clara," he said quietly, "do you know the real history of that house?" I frowned. "It's always been ours. My father said it was passed down from his side." Daniel shook his head. "That's not true. My grandparents built that house. Your family moved in later, after a debt settlement. My grandmother always told me your parents were only supposed to use it, not claim it. But over time, that part of the story got buried." I stared at him, my breath caught. The ground beneath my certainty shifted. "Are you saying it was never really ours?" "Not legally," he said, "but I think your father made it seem otherwise. And now, with what they're doing to you, I thought you should know." The revelation sent a crack through everything I believed. My father's silence, his fear, it made sense now. That evening I confronted my parents. "Daniel told me the house was never truly ours. Is that true?" My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be ridiculous. That's ancient history. What matters is now. We're selling it." I turned to my father. "Tell me the truth." He looked at me, his eyes hollow, then away. That was my answer. But the worst blow came days later. While rifling through some papers in the old study, I found it, a newer version of my father's will. My name was gone, completely erased. The page blurred as I held it, my chest constricting. He had promised me this house, sworn it was mine. And yet on paper, I didn't exist. But as I sank into the desk chair, trembling, my hand brushed against the back of a drawer. Something shifted. I pulled and a yellowed folder slipped free. Inside was an older will, signed, dated, sealed. My name was there, bold and clear. "To my daughter, Clara, I leave the country house, so she may always have a place of her own." I pressed the paper to my chest, a sob tearing through me. He had promised. And once, at least, he had meant it. But now, the betrayal was written just as clearly as the vow. I stormed into the living room, the old will clutched in my trembling hands. My father was sitting in his chair, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, reading the evening paper as though the world outside had not crumbled. "Why did you erase me?" My voice cracked, echoing through the room. I shoved the old document onto the coffee table, the paper trembling from my grip. "You promised me this house. You wrote it. You signed it. Why am I no longer in your will?" He looked up, his face lined with weariness. For a moment I thought I saw guilt flicker in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He folded the newspaper slowly, deliberately, and said, "Sometimes, Clara, family means sacrifice. Your sister needs this more than you do. It's her turn." The words stung like a lash. "Her turn? This isn't some game where we take turns. This was mine. You gave it to me." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You don't understand the bigger picture. Families survive because we put each other first. That's what you should be doing." But there was something in his tone, a crack that betrayed him. I narrowed my eyes. "This isn't about Lila, is it?" His silence was louder than any admission. My pulse quickened as I searched his face. "What else are you hiding?" When he still didn't answer, I marched toward his study. "If you won't tell me, I'll find out myself." In the bottom drawer of his desk, Under neatly stacked bills, I found them. Letters, notices, all with the same red stamp. Final warning. My heart pounded as I flipped through them. Mortgage defaults, credit card debts, private loans. He was drowning, and the house wasn't just for Lila, it was his lifeline. I staggered back, clutching the papers. "You're selling it to pay off your debts." His face crumpled, but pride kept his lips sealed. He didn't deny it. The betrayal spread through me like poison. Not only had he broken his promise, but he had hidden his weakness, letting me carry the blame as selfish while he saved his pride. I looked at him, tears burning my eyes. "You told me this house would be mine. You made me believe in you. And now I don't know who you are." He lowered his gaze, unable to meet mine. And here's the question I still whisper now, echoing like thunder. If you discovered your own parents had lied, manipulated, and betrayed you, would you forgive them? Or would you finally fight back? That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the halls of the country house, every creak of the floorboards like a reminder of the promise that had been broken. When I stepped into the hallway near the kitchen, I froze. Through the half-open door, I saw my mother. She stood with a man I didn't recognize, whispering urgently. In her hands were papers, thick, official-looking documents. The man nodded, flipping through them by the light of a lamp. My stomach turned cold. A realtor. She was showing him the house, our house, behind my back. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. The shadows hid me, but I caught every word. "We'll move quickly," she said. "She doesn't need to know until it's done." My hands clenched into fists. They weren't even going to tell me. They were going to sell it out from under me. I stumbled back to my room, choking on rage and despair. For days, I shut myself inside, blinds drawn, phone ignored. Food lost its taste. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of the house slipping through my fingers. One evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, an old photo album in my lap. My hands shook as I turned the pages. There we were, my father lifting me onto his shoulders to reach the apple tree. My mother smiling as she braided my hair, Lila and I in matching dresses on Christmas morning. I pressed my forehead to the picture, sobbing. Were those smiles ever real? Or had I just been too young to see the cracks? The past felt like a cruel joke. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail, yellowed and fragile, addressed in handwriting I recognised instantly. Mr. Hargrove, our late neighbour. My heart pounded as I unfolded the pages. Clara, if you are reading this, then perhaps the truth has finally found its way to you. That house you love. It was never truly your family's. It belonged to us, to my parents, before it ever passed into your father's hands. Your family only held it through a settlement, and even that was contested. I fear you've been told lies to make you believe it was yours. Be careful, child. Not everything is as it seems. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. My chest tightened, and I clutched the letter like it was burning me. It hit me all at once. The childhood memories, the promises, the laughter, they were built on stolen ground. My life, my identity, my sanctuary had been a lie. I curled onto the floor, sobbing until the world blurred into nothing. The house I thought was my legacy had never been mine at all. The days after I read Mr. Hargrove's letter were a blur of grief and fire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces, calm and calculating, hiding truths that had gutted me. For a while I felt paralysed, but then something shifted. I looked in the mirror one morning, swollen-eyed and hollow, and whispered, "If they intend to betray me, I'll betray them first." That sentence lit something inside me. For years I had been the compliant daughter, swallowing every cut, every slight, but not anymore. I gathered the old will, the letter, every scrap of paper I had, and walked into a lawyer's office in town. He was an older man, grey-haired, with sharp glasses that made him look like he could see right through me. I laid the documents in front of him with shaking hands. He read silently for a long time, tapping his finger against the desk. Finally, he looked up. "This older will, Clara, it's still valid. Unless there's proof that your father legally revoked it, it stands." My throat tightened. "So, the house, it's still mine?" "In the eyes of the law, yes," he said, "but your parents will fight. Be prepared." I nodded, my pulse racing. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. That night, back at the house, I searched through my father's study again. My hands trembled as I tried combinations on his old safe, numbers I remembered from birthdays and anniversaries. Finally, with a click, the door swung open. Inside, neatly stacked files lined the shelves, but buried beneath them was a thin envelope, worn at the edges. I pulled it out, unfolding carefully. My breath caught. It was the original ink-dark will, my father's handwriting unmistakable. He had tried to bury it, to hide it from me. But here it was, undeniable. I sank onto the floor, clutching it. He had tried to erase me, but the truth refused to stay buried. That night, lying awake, I made my decision. If they wanted to strip me of my home, I would beat them to it. I would sell the house before they ever could. The next day I searched for a buyer. That's when I heard his name again, Ethan Hargrove. The grandson of Mr. Hargrove, the boy my family had mocked as poor and unworthy. He was grown now, successful in real estate and living back in town. We met at a cafe. He walked in tall, confident, carrying the same steady kindness I remembered from childhood. "Clara," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I heard about the trouble. I'm sorry," I bit my lip. "Ethan, I need your help. I want to sell the house. Quietly, legally, to someone I can trust." His brows rose. "To me?" I nodded. "This place belonged to your family once. Maybe it should again." He studied me, then leaned forward. You know what this means?" "Your parents will never forgive you," I swallowed. "They never really loved me anyway, not enough to keep a promise." For a moment, silence hung between us, filled only by the clink of coffee cups around us. Then he nodded. "All right, let's do this." We spent hours drafting plans. Ethan brought in his lawyer, discreet and efficient. Every document was checked, every loophole sealed. It was airtight. If my parents tried to fight, they would lose. But late that night, sitting with Ethan at the dining table of my house, surrounded by stacks of papers, the weight of it hit me. I stared at the contract, pen in hand, my fingers trembling. "What if I'm wrong?" I whispered. "What if I destroy everything for nothing?" Ethan leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Clara, you're not destroying. You're reclaiming. You've been silenced, manipulated, erased. This is your chance to write your own ending." Tears pricked my eyes. For a moment I allowed myself to breathe, to feel seen, not as the scapegoat, not as the selfish daughter, but as a woman fighting for her life. I told him about the nights I lay awake, doubting myself, hearing my mother's voice in my head calling me cruel. I told him how part of me still wanted to believe my father loved me, even after everything. Ethan listened, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're not cruel," he said softly. "You're surviving." Something in me cracked, and I wept, silently, fiercely, until the storm passed. Then I picked up the pen. My hand shook as I pressed it to the paper. Every letter of my name felt like thunder, echoing through the silence of the room. When I finished, I set the pen down, my breath ragged. I had done it. But as I looked at the signed contract, a single thought twisted in my chest, heavy as stone. Had I just betrayed my family, or had I finally saved myself? 2 weeks passed in silence, so sharp it felt like glass. I barely left the house, waiting for the inevitable storm. The contract had been filed, the money transferred, the documents sealed. On paper, I no longer owned the country house. Ethan did. Yet I stayed, lingering, walking its halls one last time, memorizing the way the sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, the smell of cedar rising from the old beams. I knew my family would come, I just didn't know when. It was just after dawn when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My stomach dropped. I moved toward the window, careful not to make a sound. There he was, my father, stepping out of his truck with the certainty of a man who believed the world still bent to him. His shoulders were stiff, his eyes dark with resolve. He didn't knock, he never did. He shoved the door open and strode inside like it was still his kingdom. But instead of finding me, he froze. Ethan was there, standing in the parlour, papers neatly stacked on the table. He wore a calm expression, but his presence filled the room with authority. My father's face contorted. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" "This isn't your house," Ethan replied evenly. He reached to the wall beside the door and pulled down a framed sheet of paper. My father's eyes darted to it. His skin drained of colour. It was the certificate of ownership, bold letters declaring Ethan Hargrove the sole legal owner of the property. For a moment my father looked as if he'd been struck. His mouth opened, then closed, his fists clenched. No, this is a trick." "It isn't," Ethan said. "It's legal, it's binding. This house belongs to me now." I stepped into the room then, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might crack my ribs. My father turned, his face twisted with something between rage and despair. "You," he spat, "you did this. You destroyed everything." My throat tightened. "No, Dad, you destroyed everything when you broke your promise. I only protected myself." He shook his head wildly, refusing to believe, refusing to accept. His chest heaved as though the very air betrayed him. Then he stumbled backward, eyes fixed once more on the paper, on the wall. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. By the time my mother arrived, dragged in by Lila's anxious phone call, the news had already spread. Ethan didn't hide what had happened. Neighbours gathered on porches, whispering, pointing. The illusion of our perfect family had begun to crack. My mother burst through the door, her face flushed with fury. "Clara!" she screamed. "How could you? You've ruined us. You've destroyed this family." I stood rooted, trembling but firm. I didn't destroy anything. I only refused to be sacrificed again. She lunged toward me, but my father caught her arm. His grip looked less protective than desperate, as if he needed someone to hold on to while the ground slipped beneath him. Lila entered last, her hand resting dramatically on her swollen belly. For once, her voice wasn't gentle, it was sharp, bitter. "So this is it? All those promises, all those words? You told me I'd have a home, and now I have nothing?" "Lila," my mother began, but Lila snapped her hand away. "No," she cried. "You lied to me. You made me believe she was the selfish one, that she was the problem. But it was you, both of you. You ruined this." Her voice cracked, the words heavy with betrayal. She turned her back on them, her shoulders shaking, and for the first time, she didn't look at me with smug superiority. She looked at me with something closer to recognition, because she, too, had been lied to. The room dissolved into chaos. My mother's shrieks, my father's muttering denials, Lila's sobs, it all spun together like the collapse of a house of cards. Outside, the neighbours watched through curtains and half-open doors. The image of our perfect family shattered in real time. I stood in the centre, strangely calm. For years I had been the scapegoat, the villain of their stories. But now the truth lay bare. They weren't noble, selfless guardians of family. They were broken, desperate people clinging to lies. I turned to Ethan. He gave me a small nod, one of quiet solidarity. Then I walked toward the door. My parents' voices rose behind me, begging, cursing, accusing. My sister's sobs joined them, sharp and unrelenting. But I didn't stop. On the porch, I paused for a single breath. The morning air was cool, the sky pale with the first light of day. Behind me, the house I had loved and lost echoed with the sounds of collapse, not of walls, but of illusions. And then I stepped away, leaving their cries behind me. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, as though the storm had passed and left a hollow calm in its wake. News travelled fast in our small town. By the end of the week, everyone knew the truth that Ethan Hargrove now owned the country house, and that my family had lost their grip on the story they'd spun for decades. For once, people didn't look at me with suspicion. They looked at me with curiosity and, in some cases, respect. Ethan had become an unexpected symbol of justice. A man whose family had been wronged, reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. And standing beside him, I was no longer the selfish daughter who refused to help. I was the woman who'd survived betrayal and fought back. At the market, an aunt I hadn't spoken to in months approached me hesitantly. "Clara," she said softly, her hands twisting in front of her, I owe you an apology. I believed what your mother told me. I thought you were cruel, but now I see what they did to you." Her words cracked something inside me, but not in the way I expected. Instead of anger, I felt release. "Thank you," I whispered. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, and for once, that was enough. Others followed. Cousins who had once taken my parents' side now sent messages, some embarrassed, some tearful. The tide had shifted, and the weight I carried for years began to ease, piece by piece. Still, I couldn't shake the question that haunted me. If the house was gone, if the legacy I'd clung to had crumbled, then who was I now? Late one evening, as I sorted through the last of my boxes in the small apartment I had rented, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was short, unsigned, almost cryptic. "The house is gone, but you are free." I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening. Free. The word echoed in my mind, foreign yet familiar. I set the phone down and looked out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt untethered, not lost, but unbound. The house had been my anchor, but also my chain. Without it, I had room to breathe. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt quietly. I took a new job, one that had nothing to do with my family's approval. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a girl, the canvas filled with colours that felt like parts of myself I had forgotten, reds of fury, blues of sorrow, whites of peace. Ethan visited often. Sometimes we spoke of the house, sometimes we didn't. He didn't demand, didn't pry. He simply stood as a reminder that justice, however delayed, could still be real. One evening, as we walked along the river, I confessed, I thought revenge would feel like fire, but it feels more like air, like breathing again. He smiled. That's because it isn't revenge, it's freedom. I carried those words with me. One morning I drove out to the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide and the horizon seemed endless. The sky was streaked with the pale colours of dawn. I stood there, the wind tugging at my hair, and for the first time in my life I inhaled without the weight of someone else's judgment pressing down on me. The memories of my parents still stung, the betrayal, the manipulation, the endless comparisons to Lila. But they no longer defined me. I was not the scapegoat. I was not the forgotten daughter. I was simply Clara. As the sun broke fully over the horizon, I closed my eyes and let the light touch my face. I thought of every scar, every tear, every shattered illusion that had brought me here. And for the first time, I didn't wish any of it away. It had forged me, and now it released me, but freedom is never simple. As I drove back toward the city, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this time sharper, colder. This isn't over. I gripped the wheel, my heart skipping a beat. My parents were quiet now, their voices drowned out by their own collapse. But silence, I realized, is not always peace. It can be the sound of someone gathering strength to strike again. The thought lingered as I pulled into my driveway. I stepped out, looking once more at the rising sun, and exhaled slowly. I was free, for now. But if they came back, I would be ready.